For 10 years, my daughter called me every Friday at exactly 6 o'clock. Not once did she miss it. Until last week. At first, I made excuses. Maybe she was stuck at the hospital. Maybe her phone died. But by midnight, after 7 calls straight to voicemail, I felt it in my bones. Something was wrong. I drove to her house at dawn, telling myself not to panic. The driveway was empty. The curtains were shut tight. Then I heard a soft rustling from my granddaughter's closet. When I opened that door, my hands started to shake. I'm truly thankful you're here with me in this moment. Your presence matters more than you realize. Before we go any further, I'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Share your city or country in the comments. It always amazes me to see how far these stories travel. And if you're comfortable, tell me something personal. How old are you? I genuinely care about knowing who is on the other side of these stories. One gentle reminder: some elements of this story have been shaped for reflection and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental. But the heart of the message, the truth behind it, is very real. And I hope it stays with you long after this ends. Every Friday at exactly 6 o'clock, my daughter called me. For 10 years, that phone rang like it was tied to the heartbeat of my life. It didn't matter if there was a thunderstorm rolling across the hills of Tennessee, or if she'd just worked 12 straight hours at regional hospital. At 6 on the dot, the landline on my kitchen wall would ring. Last Friday it didn't. My name is Elias Monroe. I'm 63 years old, a retired electrician living in a quiet patch of Tennessee, where the mornings smell like dew and cut grass, and neighbors still lift a hand when they drive past. For 40 years, I worked with circuits and wires, tracing power from source to switch, from breaker to bulb. My whole life was built on understanding connections. When something stopped working, I didn't panic. I found the fault. Retirement was supposed to be peaceful, and for the most part it was, especially on Fridays. Fridays had a rhythm. I'd finish tending to the garden, wash my hands in the utility sink, pour a fresh cup of coffee, and sit at the kitchen table with the old cream-colored rotary phone hanging on the wall behind me. I kept that phone out of stubbornness, I suppose. People teased me about it, but it worked. Solid, reliable. Like most things from the 90s. At 5:58 p.m., I'd glance at the clock. At 6 p.m., it would ring. And on the other end would be Ivy. "Hey, Dad," she'd say. And I'd hear the smile in her voice before I pictured it on her face. The same smile she'd had at 8 years old, when she'd followed me around the garage holding pliers twice the size of her hand. "Why does this wire go here?" she'd ask back then. "Because everything connects, sweetheart," I'd tell her. "You just have to trace it back to the source." She didn't become an electrician like me. She became a nurse. Said she wanted to fix people instead of wiring. I couldn't argue with that. Ivy had a gift for caring. Patients trusted her. Colleagues leaned on her. She was steady in a crisis, calm in chaos. That's what good nurses are. That's what my daughter was. Our Friday calls usually lasted an hour, sometimes longer. She'd tell me about her week, about short staffing, about grateful patients, about the kind of days that made her question everything, until someone squeezed her hand and said thank you. I'd tell her about mine, about the tomatoes finally ripening, about the faucet in the guest bathroom that had been dripping for months before I got around to fixing it, about Mrs. Patterson down the street, bringing over another casserole like I was still raising a family instead of living alone. And then Quinn would grab the phone. My granddaughter, 10 years old, sharp as a tack, curious about everything. "Grandpa, when can I come visit?" "This weekend, sweetheart. If your mom says it's okay." Most weekends, she did visit. She'd sit on a wooden stool in my garage asking questions while I tinkered with small repairs. Just like Ivy used to. Same furrowed brow. Same stubborn determination to understand how things worked. Those Friday calls weren't just routine. They were anchor points. 6 o'clock. Every Friday, without fail, until last Friday. I was at my kitchen table, my coffee cooling in the world's best dad mug Ivy gave me 15 years ago. The late summer light poured through the window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. The house was quiet in that comfortable way I'd grown used to. 5:58 p.m. I looked at the clock. 2 minutes. The phone hung silent on the wall. 6 o'clock p.m. came and went. 6:08. I told myself she was finishing up a task at the hospital. 6:10. Maybe she'd been pulled into something urgent. 6:05. I stood up, walked over, and lifted the receiver. Dial tone, strong and steady. Nothing wrong with the line. So I dialed her number. I didn't need to look at it. I memorized it the day she moved into her own place 11 years ago. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then her voicemail picked up. Bright. Normal. Familiar. Hi, you've reached Ivy. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll call you back. Hey, sweetheart, I said, trying to sound casual. It's Dad. Just checking in. Give me a call when you get a chance. I hung up and told myself not to be dramatic. Ivy worked hard, sometimes too hard. She'd stayed late before, she'd missed dinner, she'd come home exhausted. But she never missed Friday. 7 o'clock, I called again. Voicemail. 8 o'clock, voicemail. 9 o'clock, straight to voicemail this time. Phone off, dead battery, I thought. That's when a different thought crept in. Dylan, my son-in-law, married to Ivy for 11 years. Financial advisor, always polished, always smooth. He said the right things at holidays, smiled at church, called me sir with that careful respect. But lately, something about him had felt off. 3 weeks earlier, Quinn had stayed with me for the weekend. I'd called Dylan to confirm pickup time, asked how work was going. Busy, he'd said quickly. Too quickly. Conference downtown. Except Quinn had mentioned offhandedly that Daddy had been home watching football that same weekend. Kids mix up days sometimes, I told myself then. But I remembered Dylan's eyes. The way they slid away from mine when he talked about money. The way his answers felt rehearsed. 40 years tracing faulty wiring teaches you to notice inconsistencies. When voltage doesn't match load. When something hums wrong. That Friday night, something hummed wrong. 10 o'clock, voicemail. 11, voicemail. By midnight, I'd called 7 times. 7 unanswered calls. 7 times listening to that cheerful recorded message. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. The kitchen felt cavernous and hollow. I stood by the window, staring out at the empty street. Streetlights cast orange pools across the pavement. Somewhere 2.5 hours north, my daughter wasn't answering her phone. That tingling at the base of my skull, something I'd learned never to ignore, had turned into a weight in my chest. I thought about the last few calls. Ivy had sounded tired. More than usual. There had been pauses in her sentences. Moments where she seemed about to say something and then didn't. You okay? I'd asked once. Yeah, she'd replied too quickly. Just work stuff. I'd let it go. Now that memory gnawed at me. Everything connects, I'd told her when she was 8. Trace it back to the source. But what happens when the line goes dead? When there's no signal to trace? I picked up the receiver one last time. Voicemail. I set it back in its cradle slowly, deliberately. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'll call first thing in the morning. And if she doesn't answer, I'll drive up. I tried to lie down. Couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the night. The refrigerator hummed. Every small sound felt amplified. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2! By 3 I knew. This wasn't overtime. This wasn't a dead battery. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. By midnight, after 7 calls into the void, I stopped making excuses. I stood in my kitchen, staring at that silent phone on the wall, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to lose a connection I couldn't repair. That's when I knew something had happened, and whatever it wasn't small. Saturday morning didn't bring relief. It brought weight, the kind that settles behind your ribs and refuses to move. I never went to bed Friday night. I tried once, lay down around 1 a.m., stared at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined my phone lighting up with Ivy's name. It never did. By 3 in the morning, I was back at the kitchen table. By 4, I'd brewed my second pot of coffee. By dawn, the third. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains, washing the kitchen in a colorless haze. The world outside looked normal. Birds chirping. A truck passing down the road. Somewhere someone starting a lawnmower. Inside my chest, nothing felt normal. At 7:30 a.m., I picked up the phone and dialed regional hospital. If she hadn't called me, maybe she was working. Maybe she'd picked up a shift. Maybe she'd fallen asleep in the break room after a double. The receptionist answered with a voice bright enough to cut through glass. Regional hospital, how may I direct your call? Nursing station, please, I said. 4th floor. I'm trying to reach Ivy Monroe. A click. A short stretch of instrumental hold music. Then a new voice, older, a little worn. 4th floor nursing. Hi, I said, forcing steadiness into my tone. I'm looking for Ivy Monroe. I'm her father. I haven't been able to reach her. There was a pause. Ivy. The nurse's tone changed. Concern crept in. She called in sick Monday morning. We haven't seen her since. Is everything all right? The coffee I'd just swallowed turned to stone in my stomach. Monday, I repeated. She's been out since Monday. That's right. She sounded awful. Said she'd be back once she felt better. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. Ivy didn't miss work. In 12 years of nursing, she had never taken a full week off. I'd watched her drag herself into shifts with a fever, limp through hallways on a sprained ankle. People need me, Dad, she'd say. I can't just not show up. Now she'd been gone 5 days, and she hadn't called me. My hands were shaking before I realized it. I dialed Dylan. 3 rings. Elias, hey. He answered smooth as polished marble. Everything okay? Too smooth. That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said carefully. I can't reach Ivy. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. The hospital says she's been out sick since Monday. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Oh yeah, he said finally. I should have called you. Ivy took Quinn on a little trip. They needed some space. Space, I repeated. Yeah, you know how she gets. Burned out. Emotional. She just needed a break. Where did they go? Just out of town. Nothing big. Mother-daughter time. Put Quinn on the phone. Another pause. They're not here right now. Out exploring. I'll have Ivy call you when they get back. When is that? A few days. I let silence stretch between us. From everything I asked, slowly. Like her job, the one she hasn't shown up to since Monday. That time the pause was longer. Yeah, he said. She was burned out. Needed distance from the hospital. The words sounded rehearsed. Polished. Too clean. 40 years tracing circuits teaches you something about patterns. Real explanations have texture, hesitation, human edges. Dylan's explanation had none. Dylan, I said, lowering my voice, if something's wrong. Nothing's wrong, he cut in. Really. Don't overthink this. Then he hung up. I stood in the kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. Dylan had always been composed. Financial advisors have to be. They project calm, stability. But that call didn't feel calm. It felt managed. It felt like a man reciting lines he'd practiced. I dialed Joyce Wallace next. Ivy's colleague, her closest friend at the hospital. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Monroe. Is everything okay? I don't know, I admitted. Have you heard from Ivy? No, Joyce said immediately. I've tried calling her since Wednesday. No answer. I drove by Thursday evening. House was dark. Her voice dropped. I'm worried. You and me both, I said. After we hung up, I opened my old laptop and logged into Facebook. I don't use it much, but Ivy did occasionally. Her last post was 2 weeks ago. A picture of Quinn holding up a papier-mâché volcano from school. Before that, nothing. No updates, no comments, no signs of a trip. I leaned back in my chair and pressed my fingers into my eyes. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really did need space. Maybe Dylan was telling the truth. Except, 3 weeks earlier, Quinn had stayed with me for the weekend. I'd called Dylan about something trivial, pickup time, I think. He'd mentioned he was at a business conference. Back-to-back meetings, he'd said. Except Quinn had casually told me Daddy had been home all weekend. Watching football. Ordering pizza. I'd dismissed it then. Kids mix up days. But now remembering the smooth certainty in his voice, that same tone this morning, my instincts flared. When something's wrong in a circuit, you don't always see it immediately. The wires can look intact. The breaker can test fine. But there's a hum in the air. A vibration in your bones. That's not paranoia. That's experience. Right now, every instinct I had was screaming that something catastrophic had happened. I checked the clock. 8:45 a.m., 2.5 hours to Ivy's house. If I left now, I'd be there before noon. I hesitated. What if I showed up and she was fine? What if I'd misunderstood? What if I looked like an overbearing old man who couldn't let his daughter breathe? Then I'd apologize. I could live with embarrassment. What I couldn't live with was sitting here, while that pressure inside my chest kept building. I went upstairs and pulled an overnight bag from the closet. Threw in a change of clothes, my blood pressure medication, phone charger, toothbrush. Then I opened the small wooden box in my dresser drawer and took out the spare key Ivy had given me years ago, just in case Dad, she'd said. Emergencies. The metal felt heavier than it should have. This felt like an emergency. Before zipping the bag, I tried her number again, straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Ivy. Her voice sounded normal, bright. Sweetheart, I said after the beep, it's Dad again. I'm coming up tomorrow morning, early. If you hear this before I get there, call me. I just need to know you're okay. I hung up and set the alarm for 5 a.m., but I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about circuits. About what happens when a connection is severed, when the current stops flowing. Sometimes the problem is small, a loose screw, a frayed wire. Sometimes it's a fire behind the walls. I replayed Dylan's voice in my head, that polished calm, that careful reassurance. He hadn't sounded worried. He hadn't sounded irritated. He'd sounded prepared. Prepared for the questions. Prepared with the answers. By midnight, I'd known something was wrong. By Saturday morning, I knew something was being hidden. I got up before the alarm went off. Showered, dressed, carried the overnight bag downstairs. I paused in the kitchen, staring at the silent landline on the wall. For 10 years, that phone had rung every Friday at 6. Now it sat still. I picked up the bag and set it by the front door. Something inside me said I needed to move quickly. I just didn't know yet that while I was debating whether to leave, my granddaughter had already been alone for nearly a week. And my daughter had already stopped calling. The sunrise spilled across the Tennessee hills in streaks of amber and soft rose, but I barely registered it. Normally I'd notice things like that, the way fog hangs low in the valleys, the way the light hits the trees just right. But that morning the world felt distant, muted. My truck rolled down the highway at 5:30 a.m., engine humming steady beneath me, 2.5 hours north. I'd driven this route so many times it was etched into muscle memory. But that morning, every mile felt heavier than the last. The coffee in my thermos had long since gone cold. I drank it anyway. Bitter, metallic. Anything to give my hands something to do besides tremble on the steering wheel. I'd made this drive for birthdays, for Christmas mornings, for 4th of July barbecues, for small emergencies, leaky pipes, broken garbage disposals, light fixtures Dylan couldn't seem to figure out. Or wouldn't. I'd never minded. I liked being needed. Liked knowing Ivy still called when something in her house didn't work right. But that morning felt different. The white lane markings blurred beneath the tires. The radio stayed off. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my own breathing, tight and shallow. My mind drifted the way it does when you're driving alone too long. I saw Ivy at 8 years old, standing in the kitchen beside me on a rickety step stool while we rewired the overhead light. Her hands were small fingers smudged with dust from the ceiling fixture. "Daddy, why does this wire go there?" she'd asked, brow furrowed in fierce concentration. "Because everything's connected," I'd told her, guiding her hand toward the ground wire. You can't always see how it connects, but it does. And if something's loose, you'll feel it before you see it. There's a hum, she'd said, seriously repeating my words back to me like they were sacred. Exactly, a warning. She'd nodded like she understood the weight of that. Maybe she did. The memory shifted Ivy at 22, fresh out of nursing school. We'd sat on the narrow balcony of her first apartment, legs stretched out, watching the sun sink behind apartment rooftops. I want to fix people the way you fix things, she'd told me, when they're broken. I remember the pride swelling in my chest. She'd taken my lessons about connections and turned them into compassion. She healed instead of wiring. She completed circuits in a different way. Then the wedding came. 11 years ago, I'd walked her down the aisle in a small country church outside town. Her hand trembled slightly in the crook of my arm, not from doubt, I told myself. Just nerves. Dylan stood at the altar in a rented tuxedo posture, straight smile polished. Confident. Smooth. Too smooth. Even then, something had buzzed faintly at the base of my skull. A subtle resistance in the current. Nothing obvious, just something. I'd mentioned it gently the week before. Dad, I love him, she'd said. Isn't that enough? What kind of father keeps pushing after that? So I swallowed it. Smiled for pictures. Shook Dylan's hand. Told myself I was being protective. Now, with the highway stretching endlessly ahead of me, I wondered if I'd confused instinct with overreaction. The hills gave way to flatter land as I passed a rest stop, a weathered gas station, a small town whose name I didn't catch. Road signs flicked past in green blurs. My thoughts circled the last few months. Dylan had been busy. That was the word Ivy used on our Friday calls. He's just busy with work, Dad. But her voice always had that slight tension under it, like a wire pulled too tight. Ready to snap. 3 weeks ago, I'd been down for Quinn's birthday. We'd sat on the porch steps eating ice cream, the late afternoon sun warming the wood beneath us. Out of nowhere, Quinn had asked Grandpa, "What do you do when someone lies to you?" The question had landed strangely. "Why do you ask?" I'd said. She'd shrugged suddenly, very focused on her melting scoop. Just wondering. I'd let it go. Kids ask things like that all the time. Now, gripping the steering wheel, I felt that memory tighten like a vice around my chest. I should have asked more. I should have leaned in. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, jolting me back to the present. For one desperate second, hope surged. But it was just a reminder notification. I picked it up anyway and dialed Dylan. 4 rings. Voicemail. "This is Dylan Keller. Leave a message." "Dylan," I said evenly, forcing the shake out of my voice. "I'm on my way. If Ivy and Quinn are home, have her call me immediately. If they're on this trip you mentioned, I want proof. A photo. A video call. Something. I'll be there in less than an hour." I ended the call and tossed the phone back down. 40 years in electrical work teaches you to recognize when something is about to fail. There's a prickling along your spine, a subtle vibration in the air. You might not know which breaker is tripping yet, but you know a storm is coming. That hum had been building all weekend. Dylan's explanations were too neat, too convenient. His tone perfectly calibrated. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't. No irritation, no confusion, no urgency. If your wife and daughter were suddenly unreachable, wouldn't you sound worried? The closer I got to the suburbs, the more the landscape changed. Rolling hills flattened into subdivisions. Identical houses lined up like soldiers, white siding, trimmed lawns, 2-car garages. This was where Ivy had built her life, where Quinn learned to ride her bike, where Friday calls came from. I turned onto Oakwood Drive and slowed. Number 47. The house came into view and my stomach dropped. No car in the driveway. No lights in the windows. Curtains drawn. The lawn looked slightly overgrown, like it hadn't been touched in days. A package sat on the porch steps, cardboard edges darkened from morning dew. I pulled over across the street and cut the engine. Silence flooded the cab. For a long moment I didn't move. I just sat there, hands locked around the steering wheel, staring at the house. Every part of me wanted to storm across that street. Pound on the door. Break it down if I had to. But panic doesn't fix circuits. You assess first, breathe, look for signs. I scanned the windows. No movement. No flicker of television light. No curtain shift. The mailbox looked full. The package on the porch hadn't been brought in. My chest tightened. I stepped out of the truck. The morning air felt cooler than it should have. Crisp. Too still. The street was quiet. A dog barked faintly somewhere down the block. A sprinkler hissed to life 2 houses over. Normal sounds. An abnormal house. I crossed the street slowly, my boots crunching against the pavement, heart pounding harder with every step. The front yard felt different up close. Unlived in. Still. I climbed the porch steps and stood at the door. For just a second, I closed my eyes. Think like an electrician. When a connection fails, you don't start ripping wires out of the wall. You test. You listen. You trace. But as I stood there staring at that door, one truth pressed harder than anything else. The hum I'd felt since Friday night was no longer subtle. It was screaming, and whatever had gone wrong inside that house was no small fault in the wiring. It was something catastrophic. I raised my hand and knocked. I crossed the street slowly like a man walking toward a verdict he already feared. Dylan's silver sedan wasn't in the driveway. Just an empty slab of concrete with a dark oil stain in the center, like a shadow that wouldn't wash away. Every curtain in the house was pulled tight. The morning sun hit the windows at an angle that made them look opaque, blank, reflective. Like closed eyes refusing to open. The neighborhood was too still. Lawns trimmed. Flags hanging neatly from porches. A sprinkler ticking somewhere nearby. Everything ordinary, nothing right. I climbed the porch steps, each bootfall heavier than the last. A package rested beside the front door, cardboard corners swollen and soft from dew. I bent to check the label. Delivered 5 days ago. 5 days. I straightened and knocked. 3 firm raps that echoed louder than they should have in the quiet street. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. My knuckles stung. Ivy, I called. Quinn. My voice bounced back at me hollow. Somewhere down the block, a dog began barking. I pressed my ear against the door. Listened. No footsteps. No television. No movement. Just a faint, steady hum from inside the refrigerator motor cycling on. That's when the memory came back. 2 summers ago, Ivy had locked herself out while dragging the trash bins to the curb. I'd driven down grumbling good-naturedly, trying to wedge the door open with a credit card, like I'd seen in movies. She'd laughed at me. Dad, I work night shifts. I need a backup plan. She'd shown me the decorative rock tucked near the flower bed. A hollow fake stone with a spare key hidden inside. Don't tell Dylan, she'd said with a wink. He thinks it's tacky. I jumped off the porch and scanned the front flower bed. Azaleas wilted slightly in the heat. Mulch scattered unevenly. There, a gray plastic rock that didn't quite match the others. I crouched, lifted it, twisted the bottom. The key dropped into my palm. It felt colder than it should have. My hand shook as I climbed back up the steps and slid the key into the lock. For a split second, I hesitated. Once I opened this door, whatever was waiting inside would become real. The deadbolt clicked. A final sound. I pushed the door open. The air that met me wasn't rotten or metallic. There was no obvious scent of violence. Just stale air, closed-up air. The kind that settles when a house hasn't been opened in days. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. The living room looked almost normal. Almost. But when you've spent 40 years spotting flaws in wiring hidden behind walls, your eye learns to see what others miss. The coffee table was slightly crooked. Not dramatically, just enough that its edge didn't align with the rug's pattern. The couch cushions were arranged too neatly, perfectly symmetrical. The kind of perfect that comes from someone straightening in a hurry. A throw pillow lay on the floor behind the armchair, half hidden. I walked further and heart pounding harder with every step. Family photos lined the mantel, Ivy at graduation, Quinn missing her front teeth, Christmas morning snapshots. But 2 frames were tilted at slight angles, as if they'd been knocked and hastily nudged back into place. The carpet showed vacuum lines, but they ran in chaotic directions, overlapping, uneven, like someone had cleaned without thinking, without caring about neatness, only about removal. Ivy, I called. My voice sounded foreign inside the empty house. Quinn. Nothing answered. I moved into the kitchen. It gleamed. Counters wiped, spotless. Sink shining. The stovetop scrubbed clean of even the smallest grease splatter. Too clean. I opened the refrigerator. Beer bottles lined the shelves. Takeout containers stacked carelessly. A half-empty gallon of milk expired 4 days ago. No juice boxes. No yogurt tubes. No apple slices in plastic bags. Nothing a 10-year-old would reach for. I shut the fridge slowly. Something pressed heavier against my chest. I reached for the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. It was damp. Recently used. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint, I thought at first it was imagination. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Soft. Fragile. Like fingernails dragging weakly across wood. I froze. The sound came again. From upstairs. My pulse roared in my ears as I moved toward the staircase. Each step felt like wading through water. The house seemed to hold its breath around me. I climbed 2 steps at a time. The second-floor hallway was dim. Bedroom doors closed. Then, scratch. From the far end. Quinn's room. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I twisted the knob and flung the door open. Pink curtains softened the light. Stuffed animals lined the shelves in tidy rows. A backpack slouched in the corner, one zipper half open, school folders peeking out. Everything looked ordinary, except for the sound. Scratch. From the closet. My legs moved before my mind did. 3 steps across the room. My hand wrapped around the closet handle. I yanked it open. For a second, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Behind a pile of winter coats curled into herself was Quinn, my granddaughter. Her skin was ghost pale, except for a burning flush across her cheeks. Lips cracked and bleeding, eyes glassy, unfocused. She clutched a faded blue stuffed rabbit against her chest, the same one Ivy had bought her when she was 3. Its fur was matted and darkened. "Grandpa," she whispered. Her voice was dry, brittle, like paper tearing. I dropped to my knees so hard they hit the floor with a thud. "Sweetheart," I breathed. She weighed almost nothing when I lifted her. Just fragile bones and scorching heat. Her body felt wrong in my arms, too light, too limp. I pressed my hand to her forehead. Fire. Her breathing came shallow and uneven, each inhale a struggle. "I've got you," I said, though my voice shook. "I've got you now." Her fingers tightened weakly in my shirt. For a second her eyes focused. "Grandpa," she said again. I heard Mama scream. The words sliced clean through me. And then everything went quiet. My throat closed. I forced myself to move. Phone, pocket, 911. The digits blurred, but I managed to press them. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. 47 Oakwood Drive. My granddaughter, 10 years old. Severe dehydration. High fever. She's been alone for. My voice broke. "Please, hurry." The dispatcher asked questions. I answered automatically. Breathing, yes. Conscious, barely. Any visible injuries, no. I held Quinn close while I spoke, feeling every fragile breath against my chest. Her small fingers dug weakly into my shirt like she was afraid I might disappear. "How long?" I whispered into her tangled hair once I ended the call. "How long have you been here, baby?" She blinked slowly. "I don't know," she murmured. I stopped counting after 7 days. 7 days. The number hit like a physical blow. 7 days in a closet, alone. No water but what she'd rationed. No food but what she'd scavenged. Hearing her mother scream. Then silence. I tightened my arms around her as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The house that had once been filled with laughter, Friday phone calls, and birthday candles now felt like a hollow shell. And as I rocked my granddaughter in my arms, one terrible truth settled into place. Whatever had happened here was no accident, and whatever Dylan had been hiding was about to be dragged into the light. The ambulance ride to Regional Children's Hospital took 20 minutes. It felt like 20 hours. Quinn drifted in and out of consciousness, her small hand gripping mine like I was the only solid thing left in her world. "She's severe dehydration," the paramedic said, adjusting the oxygen mask over Quinn's face. "Malnutrition. This child has been alone for days." I didn't correct him. Didn't say it had been 7 days. I just held my granddaughter's hand and watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a small miracle. The ER was chaos. Doctors and nurses surrounded Quinn the moment we arrived, their movements precise and urgent. They transferred her to a gurney, hooked up IV lines, called out numbers I didn't understand. Someone tried to pull me back, but I wouldn't let go of her hand. "Sir, we need space to work." "I'm not leaving her," I said. A young doctor with kind eyes nodded. "Stay against the wall. Don't get in the way." I pressed myself into the corner and watched them save my granddaughter's life. Blood pressure cuff, temperature check, blood draws, more IV bags. The numbers slowly improved. The tension in the room gradually eased. After what felt like hours, but was probably 40 minutes, they moved Quinn to a private room. The IV drip continued steady and rhythmic. Monitors beeped softly. Her fever had started to come down. I pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. My whole body ached from the drive, from the fear, from holding myself together when everything inside me wanted to break. 7 days. My 10-year-old granddaughter had survived 7 days alone. But how? Quinn stirred her eyes, opening slowly. They were clearer now, more focused. She looked at me and I saw recognition, real recognition, for the first time since I'd found her. "Grandpa," she whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart." I squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the stuffed bunny they'd let her keep. It sat on the bedside table, matted and worn, but somehow still comforting. "Mama taught me," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "In case something bad happened." My throat tightened. "What did she teach you?" Quinn's eyes filled with tears. "Months ago. Maybe since summer, Mama would come into my room at night and tell me things. She said if I ever heard loud arguing, really loud, scary arguing, I should go straight to my closet and hide. She said not to come out until you called my name. Or the police." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Ivy had known. She'd known she was in danger and had prepared her daughter like someone preparing an escape route. So that Saturday night. Quinn continued. "I was reading in bed. Then I heard them. Dylan was yelling. Mama was crying. It got so loud." She swallowed hard. "I did what Mama said. I went to my closet and closed the door." "You did exactly right," I told her, my voice breaking. "Mama showed me where she hid snacks," Quinn said. "In my toy box under the stuffed animals, crackers and granola bars. She said it was our secret emergency kit. She told me to eat just a little bit every day if I ever had to hide." The image of Ivy carefully hiding food for her daughter, planning for the worst, made my chest ache. "What about water?" I asked. At night, when the house got really quiet, I would sneak out and go to the bathroom. I drank from the sink and filled up my water bottle. Then I'd go back to the closet before it got light. She looked down at her hands. I was so scared every time. But Mama said being brave means doing scary things when you have to. "God, Ivy, what had you been living through?" The bunny helped too," Quinn added, reaching for it. "Mama gave it to me when I was little. She said whenever I held it, I should pretend she was hugging me. So that's what I did. Every night. I had to look away for a moment, blinking hard against the tears. "Why didn't you try to leave?" I asked gently. "Or call for help?" Quinn's answer was simple. "Mama said to wait for you. She said you'd come. She said you always keep your promises and you promised to call every Friday, so if you didn't call, you'd come looking. She told me to wait for you, Grandpa. Nobody else." The weight of that trust, Ivy's faith in me, Quinn's patience nearly broke me. My daughter had spent the last months of her life teaching her child how to survive without her. She'd hidden food, rehearsed instructions, made plans for a future where she wouldn't be there. She'd known Dylan was dangerous, and she'd done everything she could to protect Quinn. But she hadn't been able to save herself. "So you did so good, sweetheart," I whispered, taking Quinn's hand again. "Your mama would be so proud of you." Quinn's eyes started to close, exhaustion finally winning. The IV drip continued its steady rhythm. Her breathing deepened, and within minutes, she was asleep. I sat there in the dim hospital room, watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the monitors beep their reassurance. She was alive. Against all odds, my granddaughter was alive. A soft knock on the door made me look up. Detective Noah Carter stood in the doorway, his expression serious. "Mr. Monroe," he said quietly. "Can we talk in the hall?" I glanced at Quinn one more time, then stood and followed him out. The hallway was bright and sterile, nurses moving past with clipboards and medicine carts. Carter pulled out a small notebook. "I need to ask you some questions about your daughter. About Ivy." I nodded, bracing myself. He flipped through a few pages, then looked up at me. "When was the last time you actually saw her in person?" I thought back. 3 weeks. Quinn's birthday party. Ivy had looked tired that day, I remembered. Distracted. But she'd smiled and served cake and said everything was fine. Through the window of Quinn's room, I could see her sleeping peacefully, still clutching that worn blue bunny. She was alive because Ivy had taught her how to hide, how to wait, how to survive, and I said the words I'd been avoiding since I'd found that empty house. "My daughter is dead, isn't she? Dylan did this to her." The next morning, after Quinn had slept 12 straight hours with IV fluids helping her small body recover, Dr. Samantha Reed arrived. Detective Carter introduced her as a child psychologist, someone trained to speak with traumatized children. She was younger than I expected, late 30s maybe, with kind eyes and a calm, gentle presence. She carried a worn leather bag stuffed with art supplies and greeted Quinn like they were old friends, not strangers in a hospital room. Detective Carter pulled me into the hallway. "There's an observation room next door. One-way glass. You can watch and listen, but she needs to talk without you present. Kids sometimes hold back when family's in the room." I nodded. "I need to hear it, even if it destroys me." He led me into a small room with darkened glass overlooking Quinn's bed. On my side, the window was a mirror. On theirs, it was clear. A small speaker crackled to life. Dr. Reed settled beside Quinn and spread out paper and colored pencils. "I heard you're very brave," she said softly. "Is it okay if we talk for a bit? You can draw while we talk." Quinn nodded and chose a blue pencil. "Can you draw what you remember from Saturday night?" Dr. Reed asked gently. "Just the people." Quinn's hand moved slowly. 3 stick figures appeared. Above them, in careful letters, she wrote Dad. A woman. "Mom. Tell me about Saturday night," Dr. Reed said. "What do you remember?" Quinn's voice was barely above a whisper. Dad and a woman came to the door. It was late. After dinner. They were loud. What were they saying? They were yelling at Mom about money. The woman said Mom owed them something. Mom said no. She said she didn't have any money. My fists tightened at my sides. What happened next? Dr. Reed's tone remained steady. They got louder. Dad was mad. He said Mom was ruining everything. The woman said Mom was selfish. Quinn pressed harder on the paper, darkening the figures. Mom told them to leave. She said she was calling Grandpa. "God, Ivy, you were trying to reach me." Then I heard. Quinn's voice cracked. Terrible sounds. Mama was crying. She was begging them to stop. She kept saying, "Please, please think of Quinn." Through the glass, I watched my granddaughter's face crumple. Dr. Reed handed her a tissue and waited. The woman said, We have to finish this. And then Dad said. Quinn stopped, her body rigid. It's okay, Dr. Reed whispered. Dad said, I'm sorry. Right before Mama stopped making any sound, I gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. My chest felt like wire pulled tight around it. Detective Carter's hand settled on my shoulder. 2 people, he murmured. Your son-in-law and a woman. We need to identify her. I forced myself to think. Chelsea, I said hoarsely. Dylan mentioned someone named Chelsea once. An ex. He said it was over. Last name, Parker. I think Chelsea Parker. Ivy once said Dylan acted strange when she came up. Carter made a note. We'll find her. Can you keep listening? I nodded, though I wasn't okay. The interview lasted another 20 minutes. Quinn described hiding in her closet, hearing footsteps, hearing her father say they needed to clean up, hearing the woman mention a storage unit. When it ended, Dr. Reed spoke briefly with Carter. Then I was allowed back into the room. Quinn looked impossibly small in that hospital bed surrounded by monitors and wires. When she saw me, she reached for my hand. I'm sorry, Grandpa, she whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said. Nothing. That night, while Quinn slept, Carter got a call. Forensics had finished at the house. He needed to come in. Tuesday morning, he found me in the hospital cafeteria staring into my 4th cup of coffee. He sat down across from me and placed a tablet on the table. I need to show you something. It won't be easy. Show me. He opened a series of photos. The living room I'd stood in days earlier, but under ultraviolet light. Purple-blue patterns glowed across the couch, the coffee table, the wall. Sprays, smears, areas someone had tried to scrub clean, Luminol Carter said. It reacts to blood, even when it's been cleaned. I stared at the glowing evidence. Your daughter fought back, he said quietly. There are clear signs of a struggle, defensive patterns. He paused. But we still haven't found her body. The words felt unreal. Dylan and Chelsea took her somewhere, I said. We believe so. We're getting a warrant for all storage units tied to Dylan Keller or anyone connected to him. We've issued a BOLO for Dylan and Chelsea Parker. I looked again at the images Ivy's living room transformed into a map of violence. The place where she'd made breakfast, folded laundry, lived her life, and where that life had ended. Find them, I said. Carter's jaw tightened. We will, and when we do, they'll answer for every second of what they did to your daughter. 5 weeks. 5 weeks of investigation, dead ends, and sleepless nights. 5 weeks of Quinn asking when we could have a funeral for her mother. 5 weeks until Detective Carter's call came. Elias, we found her. An anonymous tip from a storage facility manager on the edge of town. He'd noticed a strange smell coming from Unit 42. When police arrived with a warrant, they found what we'd been dreading. I had to drive to the county morgue to identify the body. My hands shook on the steering wheel the entire way. The highway blurred past the same route I'd driven that Sunday morning 5 weeks ago, full of worry, but still hoping I was wrong. Now I knew I'd been right. I'd just been too late. The county morgue sat in a low brick building behind the hospital. Detective Carter waited for me in the parking lot, his face grave. You don't have to do this, he said as we walked toward the entrance. We have dental records. DNA confirmation is already underway. I told him. I need to see her. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of chemicals. A medical examiner in blue scrubs met us in a hallway lined with filing cabinets. She was maybe 50 with kind eyes and a professional manner that came from years of delivering the worst news imaginable. Mr. Monroe, she said gently. I'm Dr. Helen Martinez. I'll be with you the entire time. If you need to step out at any point, that's okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She led us to a small viewing room. In the center sat a metal table covered by a white sheet. The shape underneath was unmistakable. Are you ready? Dr. Martinez asked. I wasn't. Would never be. But I nodded anyway. She pulled back the sheet, folding it carefully at Ivy's shoulders. My daughter looked like she was sleeping. Her face was peaceful, almost serene. Her dark hair had been brushed back from her forehead. She looked younger than 34. She looked like the girl who used to help me wire light fixtures and ask endless questions about how electricity worked. Except for the marks around her neck, I couldn't look away from them. Faint bruising in a pattern I didn't want to understand, but couldn't help recognizing. Someone's hands had been there. Someone had taken her last breath. I could see she fought. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The bruises on her arms. Dr. Martinez nodded. Defensive wounds. Your daughter fought very hard, Mr. Monroe. I reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched Ivy's hand. It was cold. So cold. This was the same hand that had gripped my finger when she was a baby. The same hand I'd held when teaching her to ride a bike. The same hand she'd reached out to me with at her high school graduation. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I whispered. I should have protected you. Should have trusted my instincts about Dylan. Should have gotten you out of there. Detective Carter placed a hand on my shoulder but said nothing. Dr. Martinez gave me a moment before speaking again. The official cause of death is asphyxiation, based on lividity and body temperature at discovery time of death, was Saturday evening, approximately 10:30 p.m. Saturday. The night Quinn had hidden in her closet and listened to her mother die. We found DNA evidence under her fingernails. Dr. Martinez continued, her tone remaining clinical but gentle. It's a match for Dylan Keller. She scratched him during the struggle. Good, I thought. Good. At least she'd left evidence. At least she'd marked the man who killed her. Howard. The body was moved between 2 and 3 hours after death, Dr. Martinez added. The storage unit was rented under a fake name, Michael Thompson, and paid for in cash. 3 months up front. Premeditated, Detective Carter said quietly. He had it planned. Something shifted inside me in that cold room. The grief that had been weighing me down for 5 weeks began to harden into something else. Something sharper, more focused, determination. We're building a solid homicide case, Carter said. First-degree murder, premeditated. With Quinn's testimony and the physical evidence, we have everything we need. We just need to find Dylan and Chelsea. I looked down at Ivy one more time. My strong, brave daughter who'd spent her last months teaching her child how to survive. Who'd fought her killers even knowing she couldn't win. Who'd loved Quinn enough to prepare for the worst. How long, I asked Dr. Martinez. How long until we can have a funeral? We'll release her body within the week. The autopsy is complete. I nodded. At least Quinn could say goodbye properly. At least we could give Ivy the dignity Dylan had stolen from her. I leaned down and kissed my daughter's forehead one last time. Cold. So cold. He will pay, I whispered against her skin. Dylan Keller will spend the rest of his life in prison thinking about what he did to you. I swear it. When I straightened up, Detective Carter was watching me carefully. Just as when I said, that's all I want now. Justice for my daughter. You'll have it, Carter promised. We'll make sure of it. I took one last look at Ivy, memorizing her face, storing it away with all my other memories of her, and then turned and walked out of that morgue with a singular purpose burning in my chest. In the week after I left the morgue, Detective Carter worked non-stop financial records, phone logs, witness interviews. When he called and asked me to come to the station, I knew he'd found something big. The conference room walls were covered in paper bank statements, insurance documents, spreadsheets marked in yellow. Carter sat across from me with a thick folder open. I want to show you what we've built, he said. The motive, the planning, all of it. He slid the first document over. A life insurance policy. $500,000, he said. Ivy took it out when Quinn was born. Standard term policy. She never changed the beneficiary. I stared at Dylan Keller's name listed as sole beneficiary. He would have gotten all of it, I said quietly. If she'd died from natural causes or an accident, yes. Carter handed me another stack. But here's where it changes. Dylan had serious debt. He spread out credit reports and bank statements. Total debt, $385,000. The numbers blurred together. $250,000 lost in a Ponzi scheme, Carter continued. He was recruited by a man named Robert Miller, guaranteed cryptocurrency returns. The operation collapsed. Dylan lost everything he invested and had borrowed heavily to put in more. And the rest, casino gambling, $135,000, maxed credit cards, personal loans. He was drowning. Carter turned his tablet toward me. Browser history from Dylan's laptop. 3 weeks before Ivy died, he searched. How long does life insurance pay out after death? My hands curled into fists. He planned it. He looked at my daughter and saw $500,000. There's more, Carter said. He passed me a handwritten statement. Your neighbor, Mrs. Gladys Whitmore, 70 years old, lives 2 doors down. I nodded. Sweet woman who loved to wave from her porch. She saw a silver SUV parked outside Ivy's house Saturday night around 10. Thought it was family. It wasn't, I said. The neighbor across the street has a security camera. We pulled the footage. Grainy video filled the screen. 2 vehicles in the driveway. Dylan's black sedan and the silver SUV. Timestamp 9:45 p.m. arrival. They left together at 11:30, an hour after Ivy died. An hour spent cleaning, moving her body, covering their tracks. We traced the SUV registration, Carter said. Chelsea Parker, 30 years old, lives 40 minutes away. He showed me her driver's license photo. Blonde hair, hard eyes, Dylan's ex from 10 years ago. They broke up when he married Ivy, but they reconnected recently. Over 200 calls between them in the last 3 months. Long calls. She helped him, I said. She had reason to, Carter replied. Chelsea Parker has gambling debts too, around $80,000. Together, they were buried. That insurance policy looked like an escape. I thought of Quinn's drawing. The woman at the door. The woman who said, we have to finish this. Chelsea Parker had been there. She had helped murder my daughter. There's another piece, Carter said quietly. He slid a statement across the table. Joyce Wallace, Ivy's colleague. Ivy had trusted Joyce. Joyce told us Ivy came to her 2 weeks before she died. Upset. Dylan had asked her to increase the life insurance policy to $750,000. Ivy refused. She told Joyce she was scared. The words hit like a blow. She knew, I whispered. Ivy knew something was wrong. She did, Carter said. And when she refused to increase the policy and likely started pulling away, Dylan couldn't risk losing control. If she changed the beneficiary or filed for divorce, he'd lose everything. I pressed my hands against my eyes. My daughter had been afraid. She had seen the danger. And I hadn't pushed harder. Hadn't insisted she leave. We've issued an arrest warrant for Chelsea. Parker, Carter continued. She's not in custody yet, but we'll find her. And Dylan. Carter paused. His attorney posted bail this morning. $2 million. The room seemed to tilt. He's out, with an ankle monitor and strict conditions. His lawyer argued he isn't a flight risk since his daughter is here, and there's no direct eyewitness placing him at the moment of death. Carter's jaw tightened. The judge agreed. I stood so quickly, my chair scraped across the floor. The man who killed my daughter is walking free. For now, Carter said evenly. But we're building a case that won't leave room for doubt. Financial motive, digital searches, surveillance footage, witness testimony, your granddaughter's statement. It will be airtight. I looked down at the table, the insurance policy, the debt statements, the browser history, the security stills, a trail of greed and desperation, mapped out in black ink and pixels. Dylan hadn't acted in rage. He had calculated. planned, weighed the cost against the payout. $500,000. That was what he'd decided Ivy's life was worth. And Chelsea, I asked. She'll face the same charges, Carter said. Conspiracy, first-degree murder, evidence tampering. We're not letting either of them slip away. I let out a slow breath. The grief was still there, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, something else was forming. Resolve. That's when my real fight begins, I said quietly. Carter looked at me. Your real fight. Dylan Keller's expensive lawyer just bought him temporary freedom. The man who took my daughter from me is walking around with an ankle monitor instead of handcuffs. I met his eyes. So yes, this is when my real fight begins. Carter didn't argue. He didn't need to. The evidence was on that table. The motive was clear. The plan was exposed. Now it was a matter of finishing what they had started in that courtroom, making sure Dylan Keller and Chelsea Parker paid for every choice they made. And I would be there for every step of it. Fighting the legal system felt like trying to repair live wiring in total darkness. Every time I thought I'd secured the right connection, something else sparked, snapped, or blew apart in my hands. 2 days after Dylan posted bail, the counterattack began. His attorney Gerald Hawkins wasted no time. He was exactly what you'd expect from a man who defended wealthy clients in high-profile cases. Silver hair combed back neatly, 3-piece tailored suits, cufflinks that probably cost more than my truck. Calm, polished, dangerous. The first move was bold. Dylan filed a police report accusing me of kidnapping Quinn. Kidnapping. According to his version of events, I had broken into his home, trespassed illegally, and taken his daughter without consent. The fact that I found her dehydrated, feverish, and half-starved in a closet after he had left her alone for 7 days, that detail conveniently vanished in his narrative. In his story, I was the unstable grandfather, the angry father-in-law who had never liked him, the man who saw an opportunity and seized control. Then came the paperwork. Motions filed so quickly, I could barely process them. Motion to dismiss Quinn's testimony too young, too traumatized, unreliable. Motion to exclude financial records, circumstantial, prejudicial. Motion for a restraining order Elias Monroe prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Dylan Keller. Every filing felt like another attempt to erase reality. And then Dylan took his performance public. I watched the interview from Joyce Wallace's living room. The television glow reflected off the polished hardwood floors. Dylan sat in what looked like a carefully staged environment, neutral tones, tasteful decor, nothing that resembled Ivy's house. He wore a dark blazer and an expression of quiet sorrow. I'm innocent, he said calmly into the camera. This is a tragedy for everyone involved, but my father-in-law has never accepted me. Now he's using this situation to destroy my life. He paused just long enough for effect. I loved Ivy. I would never hurt her. The reporter asked about Quinn. I'm grateful she's safe, Dylan replied. But she's traumatized. Children can be confused at that age, especially if influenced by adults with their own agenda. I turned off the television before I did something I'd regret. The next morning, 2 uniformed officers knocked on my door. They were polite, professional. They asked about my entry into Dylan's residence. I sat in a small interrogation room for 3 hours, while they went through every detail. Yes, I said. I used the spare key Ivy gave me. Yes, I entered without Dylan's permission. Yes, technically, that could be considered trespassing. And yes, I added quietly, if Dylan had tried to stop me from reaching my granddaughter, I would have moved him out of the way. The younger officer shifted in his seat. You understand, the older one said carefully, that this complicates things. Breaking and entering, potential custody interference. If the court perceives you as aggressive or unstable, you could jeopardize your guardianship claim. The message was subtle but clear. Stand down, or risk losing Quinn. That afternoon, I went to the bank and withdrew $5,000 from my retirement savings. Money I'd set aside for Quinn's college tuition, for emergencies, for a future I assumed I'd get to watch unfold peacefully. Now it was going toward a lawyer. Margaret Dawson came recommended by Joyce, family law specialist. Sharp, methodical. "You're being baited," she said during our first meeting. "Dylan's team wants you to react, to lose your temper, to look unstable." I signed the retainer agreement with a hand that felt heavier than it should have. "This isn't just a criminal case," Margaret continued. "It's also a custody battle. We need to protect your credibility at all costs." Protect my credibility, as if saving my granddaughter from a closet needed justification. That evening, Joyce came over with a casserole and something I hadn't felt in days: solid support. "I'll watch Quinn whenever you need," she said firmly. "Emma's been good for her. They've bonded." Emma, Joyce's 12-year-old daughter, had taken Quinn under her wing without hesitation. Movie nights, homework sessions, quiet understanding. It mattered more than I could express. "Ivy was like a sister to me," Joyce added softly. "I know what Dylan is. I know what he did. I'll stand with you." Her words were a small light in an increasingly dark tunnel. But outside our circle, the narrative was shifting. Dylan's public image worked in his favor. He was articulate, well-dressed, successful. I began noticing the change in my own community. Whispers at the grocery store, conversations that ended abruptly when I approached. Church felt unbearable. I stopped going after a woman I'd known for 20 years, avoided eye contact, and another muttered, "It's all so messy, messy," as if my daughter's death were a social inconvenience. Detective Noah Carter called one evening. "Elias, I believe you," he said plainly. "But belief isn't evidence. Don't give Dylan ammunition. He's trying to frame you as unstable. Stay calm. Let us build the case." I promised I would, but calm felt like a thin wire stretched too tight. One night I drove back to Ivy's house. The forensic team had finished weeks earlier. The luminol stains were gone. The house had been cleared, but I needed to see it again. I let myself in with the spare key and stood in the living room. The carpet was clean, the furniture aligned, no visible signs of violence, but I saw it anyway. I saw the struggle. I saw my daughter fighting. I saw Quinn upstairs, small and terrified. For the first time since finding Quinn in that closet, the grief overtook me completely. It wasn't controlled or measured. It came in waves that knocked me to my knees. I sat on the living room floor and let it happen. I considered walking away, taking Quinn somewhere far from this town, letting the justice system grind forward without me, starting over. Then I remembered something Quinn had whispered in that hospital bed. "I knew you'd come, Grandpa." She had waited 7 days because she believed I would show up. I couldn't abandon that belief now. I stood up slowly, wiped my face, and went back to my truck. I grabbed a spiral notebook from the passenger seat. If Dylan wanted a fight, I would fight differently. Not with rage, with persistence. I began making a list. Every person who had interacted with Dylan in the past year. Every financial transaction that looked suspicious. Every neighbor who might have heard something that night. Every inconsistency in his television interview. Every unanswered question. Every loose end. I wrote until the page was full. Then I turned it over and kept writing. Dylan had money. He had a powerful attorney. He had a polished image. But I had time, and I had something stronger than strategy. I had the truth, and a father's love that refused to burn out no matter how dark it got. 2 months after I found Quinn in that closet, I almost lost everything. Dylan's lawyer had filed a motion to dismiss the entire case. Lack of evidence, they claimed, and the judge was listening. I sat in the courtroom gallery, hands clenched on the wooden bench in front of me, watching Gerald Hawkins make his argument. He stood at the defense table in his expensive suit, every word precisely calculated. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case rests entirely on circumstantial evidence. There is no eyewitness to the alleged crime. No murder weapon has been recovered. My client has provided no confession. The testimony of a traumatized 10-year-old child, while tragic, cannot be the sole basis for a first-degree murder charge. Mr. Keller deserves to have these charges dismissed." Carol Bennett, the district attorney, stood to argue back. She was good. I'd seen her work before. But even I could see the judge's skeptical expression as she laid out our case. The court will take this under advisement, the judge said finally. I'll issue my ruling within 48 hours. The gavel came down and my stomach dropped with it. Outside the courthouse, Detective Carter pulled me aside. His face was grim. We might lose this, Elias, he said quietly. I'm sorry. We did everything we could, but no. I cut him off. Not after we've come this far. There has to be something. Some piece we're missing. Carter squeezed my shoulder. If there is, we'll find it. But we're running out of time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 a.m, surrounded by copies of every financial document Carter had shown me. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance policies. I'd been through them a dozen times already, but I spread them out again, looking for anything, any detail I might have missed. That's when I saw it. Buried in Dylan's bank statements from 8 months ago, a deposit for $95,000. The notation read, M. Consulting. I stared at it, my tired brain trying to make the connection. I'd seen this before. Carter had mentioned it in passing. But what was it? What was MZ Consulting? I grabbed my phone and called Carter. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Well, yes, it's past midnight. Not that deposit, I said. The $95,000 from MZ Consulting. What if it's connected to Dylan's debts? What if it's not legitimate business income? There was a pause. Then I heard rustling like Carter was sitting up. Hold on, let me pull up the file. I waited, my heart pounding, while he searched through his computer. MZ Consulting, Carter said slowly. I flagged it as unusual income, but Dylan's tax returns showed it as consulting fees. We didn't dig deeper because... He trailed off. And because we were focused on the debts, not the income. Can you dig deeper now? I asked. I'll start first thing in the morning. He called me back 6 hours later. I hadn't gone to bed. Elias, you might have just saved this case, Carter said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. MZ Consulting is a shell company, and it's connected to a Ponzi scheme investigation the FBI has been running for 2 years. The same Ponzi scheme Dylan lost money in. Exactly, but here's the thing, Dylan wasn't just a victim. He was a recruiter. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room at the FBI field office. Carter had arranged everything. Across from me sat Gerald Patterson, a 45-year-old accountant with tired eyes and a weathered face. I'm Mr. Monroe, Gerald said, shaking my hand. Detective Carter told me about your daughter. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, I managed. The detective said you have information about Dylan Keller. Gerald's expression hardened. Your son-in-law cost me everything. I lost $180,000 in that Ponzi scheme. My retirement, my kids' college fund, everything I'd worked for. He pulled out a folder thick with documents. But here's what you need to understand. Dylan Keller wasn't a victim like the rest of us. He was part of it. He recruited 12 people into that scheme, including me. The words didn't quite register at first. He recruited you. He gets 8% commission on every person he brings in, Gerald explained. Do the math on 12 people investing an average of $100,000 each. That's $96,000 in commissions. $95,000. The mysterious MZ Consulting deposit. Dylan spent it all on gambling, Gerald continued. And then he borrowed more, trying to chase his losses. That's why he's still $385,000 in debt even after earning all that money. Your son-in-law is a professional con artist, Mr. Monroe. He's been lying to and stealing from vulnerable people for years. Who did he target? I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. Elderly people mostly. Immigrants who trusted him because he spoke their language. People who believed he was trying to help them. Gerald's voice was bitter. If Dylan Keller could steal the life savings of strangers without blinking, imagine what he'd be capable of doing to his own wife. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a desperate man who'd killed for insurance money. This was a pattern, a history of calculated cruelty. Evidence that Dylan Keller was exactly the kind of person who could plan and execute a murder. 48 hours after the hearing, I was back in that courtroom, my hands gripping the bench again. But this time, Carol Bennett had new evidence to present. Gerald Patterson's testimony, the FBI's investigation, the proof that Dylan wasn't a desperate victim but a habitual criminal. The judge looked over the documents for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up. Based on the new evidence presented regarding the defendant's pattern of criminal behavior, the motion to dismiss is denied. This case will proceed to trial. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw Dylan's face go pale. The confident smirk he'd worn throughout the hearing vanished. His lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Dylan just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. As the bailiff led him out of the courtroom, Dylan turned and looked back at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw it. Real fear. He'd been so confident, so certain that his money and his lawyers would save him. But justice was coming, and Dylan Keller was finally beginning to realize that he couldn't buy his way out of this. While Dylan sat in his lawyer's office, confident and free on bail, Chelsea Parker was on the run. For 3 weeks, she'd paid cash at roadside motels, used burner phones, and jumped at every siren. The guilty always run, but they can't run forever. Detective Carter coordinated the manhunt with a precision I'd come to expect from him. He called me every few days with updates, keeping me in the loop, even when there wasn't much to report. Chelsea had withdrawn cash from ATMs across 3 states, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. She stayed at cheap motels, never more than 2 nights in the same place. She used prepaid credit cards and burner phones that were impossible to trace. Somewhere along the way, she dyed her hair from blonde to dark brown and started wearing glasses. "She's smart," Carter told me during one call, "or scared enough to be careful. But everyone makes mistakes eventually." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Megan Parker was 27 years old and Chelsea's younger sister. I learned about her later after everything was already in motion. Carter filled me in on the details once the arrest was made. Megan had called the police tip line, her voice shaking. I love my sister," she'd told the detective who answered. "But I can't live with what she did. A woman is dead. A little girl almost died. I can't just pretend that's okay." Chelsea had called Megan from a burner phone the night before. She'd been crying, panicking, saying things that made Megan realize how deep the trouble went. "She told me she was scared," Megan said during her interview with Carter. "She said Dylan had lied to her, that she didn't know what they were really doing until it was too late. She kept saying, 'I didn't know, Meg. I swear I didn't know.'" Carter had listened carefully, taking notes. "Your sister made a terrible mistake," he'd said gently. "But she's not a monster like Dylan Keller. If she's willing to tell the truth, she deserves that chance." Megan had provided Chelsea's last known location, a budget inn outside Cincinnati, room 14. The arrest happened at dawn. A tactical team surrounded the motel while it was still dark. Chelsea must have seen them from her window because she tried to run. She made it out of her room and into the parking lot before 3 officers tackled her to the asphalt. Carter showed me the arrest photo later. Chelsea looked nothing like the blonde woman in her driver's license picture. Her dark hair was stringy, her face pale and gaunt. She'd lost weight. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "I want a lawyer," she'd screamed as they cuffed her. "Dylan said this would be easy. He lied to me about everything." At the police station, Chelsea broke down completely. "I wasn't there for the interrogation. Victims' families aren't allowed." But Carter gave me a detailed summary afterward. Chelsea had been a mess, crying, shaking, asking for water every 5 minutes. She kept saying the same things over and over. Dylan promised we'd be together. He said Ivy was keeping his money, keeping him trapped. He said she deserved it for making his life miserable. Did Dylan tell you about the life insurance policy? Carter had asked. Chelsea had gone quiet. Then, in a small voice, "Not at first. Not until after, after, after they'd killed my daughter." That's when Dylan had told Chelsea about the $500,000. He'd used her for the murder, then dangled the money as a reward. 2 days after Chelsea's arrest, her court-appointed public defender approached District Attorney Carol Bennett with an offer. "My client wants to cooperate," the lawyer said. "She has information about the planning, the execution, everything that happened that night. She'll testify against Dylan Keller." What does she want in return?" Carol asked. "A reduced sentence. Second-degree murder instead of first. 25 years instead of life without parole." That evening, Detective Carter called me at home. I was in the kitchen making dinner for Quinn when my phone rang. "Elias Chelsea Parker's lawyer has offered a deal. She'll testify against Dylan if we reduce the charge to second-degree murder." My hand tightened on the phone. How much time would she serve? 25 years. She'd be 55 when she got out. I closed my eyes. 25 years. Ivy would have been 59. Would have watched Quinn graduate high school, college, maybe get married. Would have had a whole lifetime that Chelsea had stolen from her. "It's not enough," I said. "Not for what she did." "I know," Carter said quietly. "But without her testimony, Dylan might walk. His lawyer is that good, Elias. Gerald Hawkins will attack every piece of evidence we have. He'll say the financial motive is circumstantial. He'll claim Quinn's testimony is unreliable because she's a traumatized child. He'll create reasonable doubt. And with Chelsea's testimony, we have an eyewitness who was there, who can describe exactly how Dylan planned it, how they executed it, what he said during and after. It's the difference between a strong case and an airtight one." I sat down at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear. Through the doorway, I could see Quinn in the living room, coloring with Emma while Joyce supervised. My granddaughter who'd survived 7 days in a closet, who'd trusted me to come for her. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. "Carol Bennett can offer the deal without your approval, but she wants to know how you feel. This is your daughter we're talking about. Your family." I stared at my hands. Hands that had held Ivy when she was born. Hands that had found Quinn in that closet. Hands that were empty now because my daughter was gone. Accept partial justice for Chelsea, or risk Dylan going free entirely. "Tell Carol I agree to the deal," I said finally. "But make sure Chelsea knows something." "What's that?" 25 years is mercy. The kind of mercy she didn't give my daughter. 3 days after I agreed to Chelsea Parker's plea deal, I walked into District Attorney Carol Bennett's office knowing there was no turning back. The hallway outside her suite smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Everything about the building felt procedural routine. What I was about to hear was anything but. Carol met me at her door. She didn't offer her usual reassuring smile. "This won't be easy, Elias," she said quietly. "Some of what you're about to hear will stay with you." "I want it to," I answered. "I need to understand exactly what happened to my daughter." She studied me for a second, then nodded and led me down the corridor to a conference room. Detective Noah Carter was already seated at the table, jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair. He gave me a brief nod, professional, steady. Carol sat across from me and placed a thick folder on the table between us. The weight of it felt symbolic. Paper holding the details of violence. "Chelsea Parker's testimony is critical," Carol began. "She was present that night. She can describe the planning, the confrontation, and the cleanup. Her account supports the forensic findings in Quinn's statement." I folded my hands together to stop them from shaking. "Can we convict Dylan without her?" I asked. Carol didn't answer immediately. "We have a strong case," she said carefully. The financial motive is clear: $500,000 in life insurance against $385,000 in debt. We have forensic evidence confirming a violent struggle occurred in the house. We have Quinn's account of what she heard. And we have Gerald Patterson's testimony about Dylan's pattern of manipulating vulnerable clients. She leaned forward slightly. But Gerald Hawkins is one of the best defense attorneys in this state. He will challenge everything. He'll argue the financial records are circumstantial. He'll say Quinn's trauma makes her unreliable. He will attempt to dismantle every link in our chain. Her eyes held mine. Chelsea removes the weak links. She puts Dylan inside that house with intent. She gives us planning, motive, and execution in his own words. With her, this case becomes nearly impossible to unravel. 25 years. That was Chelsea's deal. 25 years didn't feel like enough. I pictured Quinn in that hospital bed, fingers wrapped around mine, asking if we could say goodbye to Mama the right way. Justice wasn't about my anger. It was about certainty. "I need to make a call," I said. I stepped into the hallway and dialed Joyce Wallace. She answered on the second ring. "Elias, what's going on?" "I'm second-guessing the plea deal," I admitted. "Part of me wants to withdraw it. I want Chelsea to face everything. I don't want her getting a discount." Joyce was silent for a moment. "I loved Ivy," she said finally, "like a sister. I want Chelsea punished. But more than that, I want Dylan Keller to never see freedom again. If this deal guarantees that, then take it. That's what matters. That's what Ivy would want." She was right. When I returned to the conference room, I looked at Carol and gave a single nod. "Let's hear it." Carol led us down another hallway to a smaller observation room with a one-way mirror. On the other side sat Chelsea Parker. She didn't know I was watching. She looked smaller than I'd imagined. Dark hair pulled back. Orange jumpsuit loose on her frame, hands cuffed in front of her. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her public defender sat beside her. A court reporter prepared her machine. "This is her formal proffer session," Carol explained quietly. "She understands that if she lies, the deal disappears." I sat next to Detective Carter. The chair felt too rigid beneath me. Carol entered the interview room and took her seat across from Chelsea. "Miss Parker," Carol began, "evenly describe how Dylan Keller first approached you." Chelsea's voice trembled. "About 8 weeks before that night," she said. "I was at a casino outside the city. I'd been trying to win back money I'd lost. Dylan found me there. We used to date. Before he married Ivy." My stomach twisted. "What did he say to you?" Carol asked. "He told me his marriage was falling apart," Chelsea replied. "He said Ivy was controlling the finances, that she was threatening divorce. He said if I helped him, we could be together again, and split the insurance money." There it was. $500,000, reduced to a conversation at a casino table. "How did the plan develop?" Carol asked. "Dylan handled everything," Chelsea said. "He rented a storage unit under a fake name, paid cash, bought cleaning supplies. He said we'd convince Ivy to sign paperwork first, increase coverage, make things easier. And if she refused?" Carol asked. Chelsea's jaw tightened. "He said we'd have to take more serious steps." The room felt airless. "Tell us about Saturday evening," Carol said. "We arrived at the house around 9:45. Chelsea answered. Dylan knocked. Ivy opened the door. She looked confused when she saw me. Dylan said he needed her to sign documents. She refused. She told us to leave. Chelsea wiped her eyes with the back of her cuffed hand. Dylan said we couldn't leave it unfinished, that we'd come too far. I gripped the edge of my seat and forced myself to breathe. "What happened next?" Carol asked. Chelsea's voice grew smaller. Dylan took control. Afterward, he used Ivy's phone to send text messages, to make it look like she was alive. He cleaned the house with bleach. We moved her to the storage unit. My vision blurred for a moment, but I didn't look away. "Did you notice anything else in the house?" Carol asked. Chelsea hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. "As we were leaving, I heard something upstairs." The room went silent. "What kind of sound?" Carol pressed. "Like movement. Maybe a door shifting." I asked Dylan about it. "And what did he say?" He told me not to worry. Said we had to leave immediately. That was it. That was the moment. He heard something. He knew there could be someone upstairs. And he chose not to check, not to care. The proffer session continued for another hour. Timelines, details, attempts at staging financial transfers, storage receipts. Each fact layered onto the last. By the time it ended, I felt hollowed out. When I stepped back into the hallway, my legs didn't feel steady. Detective Carter placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "You all right?" "No," I said honestly. "But I will be when Dylan is convicted." Carol joined us. "We're setting trial for early November," she said. "That gives us 8 months to prepare. With Chelsea's testimony, Quinn's account forensic evidence, and Patterson's financial records, we are building a case Dylan's money cannot dismantle. 8 months. 8 more months of waiting." As I drove home that evening, the sky darkening in my rearview mirror, I replayed one detail over and over. He heard a sound upstairs. He knew there might be someone else in that house. And he left anyway. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just debt. It wasn't even only betrayal. It was indifference. The kind of indifference that looks at the possibility of a 10-year-old child hiding upstairs and decides it doesn't matter enough to check. That truth burned hotter than any financial motive. When this case went to trial, I wouldn't just sit there quietly. I would make sure the jury understood what that choice meant. That it wasn't just a crime of money. It was a crime of character. And I would watch every single one of them understand it. 12 months? 1 full year since Dylan ended my daughter's life. 365 days of investigation, evidence gathering, and fighting through a legal system that sometimes felt designed to protect the guilty. Now finally we stood in a courtroom where truth would have its voice. I walked into the courthouse on that cold November morning with Joyce beside me. Quinn had stayed home with Emma. We'd decided she didn't need to see any of this until it was her turn to testify. The media had turned out in force. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions about the shocking murder case. I walked past them all without saying a word. Inside the courtroom, the jury had already been selected. 7 women, 5 men ranging from their 20s to their 60s. I'd studied each of their faces during selection, trying to read who they were, what they believed, whether they'd see through Dylan's lies. Dylan sat at the defense table in an expensive navy suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking for all the world like an innocent man wrongly accused. That was Gerald Hawkins's strategy, make Dylan look sympathetic, while pinning everything on Chelsea Parker. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Patricia Morrison entered and took her seat. She was in her late 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Carol had told me Judge Morrison had a reputation for running a tight courtroom and not tolerating games from either side. "The prosecution may give its opening statement," Judge Morrison said. Carol Bennett stood and walked to the jury box. She looked at each juror in turn before speaking. "This is a case about greed." She began, her voice clear and strong. "About a man who looked at his wife and saw only a paycheck. $500,000. That's the price Dylan Keller believed Ivy Monroe's life was worth." She paused, letting that sink in. "Over the next several days, you'll hear testimony about Dylan Keller's debts. $385,000 he owed to casinos, to the victims of a Ponzi scheme he helped run, to loan sharks and credit card companies. You'll hear about how he planned this crime for weeks, renting a storage unit under a fake name, buying cleaning supplies, rehearsing his story." Carol's voice softened. "But you'll also hear from a 10-year-old girl named Quinn, a child who survived 7 days alone in a closet because her mother taught her how to hide. A mother who knew she was in danger but couldn't escape in time." I watched the jury. Several of the women had already started to tear up. "The evidence will show that Dylan Keller murdered his wife for insurance money," Carol continued. "And then he left his daughter to die because checking on her would have been inconvenient. Listen to the evidence. Look at the facts. And when you do, you'll see exactly what Dylan Keller is, a man who values money more than human life." She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Gerald Hawkins stood next. Where Carol had been passionate, he was smooth, likable. the kind of lawyer who made you want to trust him. Dylan Keller is not a saint, Hawkins began. He made mistakes, he got into debt, he made poor financial decisions, but he is not the cold-blooded killer the prosecution wants you to believe. Hawkins walked toward the jury, his hands open in a gesture of honesty. The real villain in this case is Chelsea Parker, a manipulative woman who rekindled an old romance with Dylan, seduced him, convinced him to help her, and then took matters into her own hands. Dylan Keller was in another room when Ivy died. He didn't know what Chelsea was doing until it was too late. I felt my jaw clench. Lies, all lies. Chelsea Parker has admitted her guilt. Hawkins continued. She's serving 25 years in prison, but she made a deal with prosecutors to testify against Dylan in exchange for that reduced sentence. Ask yourselves, what is her testimony really worth? Can you trust a woman who would do anything to reduce her prison time? He paused. Dylan Keller is a victim here too. A victim of Chelsea Parker's manipulation. And I ask you to keep an open mind as you hear the evidence. The first witness was a forensic expert who testified about the blood evidence found in Ivy's living room. The luminol photos were displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. Even cleaned the room had glowed with traces of what had happened there. The DNA was recovered from under the victim's fingernails, the expert said. It matched Dylan Keller. Meaning she scratched him during a struggle, Carol asked. Yes. Mrs. Gladys Whitmore took the stand next. At 73, she was sharp as ever, wearing a floral dress and pearls. I saw a silver SUV parked outside the Monroe house that Saturday night, she testified. Around 10 o'clock. Are you certain of the time? Carol asked. Positive. I just finished watching my television program. On cross-examination, Hawkins tried to shake her. Mrs. Whitmore, it was dark that night, and raining. Are you sure you saw what you think you saw? Mrs. Whitmore fixed him with a look that could have frozen water. Young man, I'm 73, not senile. I know what I saw. Several jurors smiled. Then came Logan, Mrs. Whitmore's 16-year-old grandson. He looked nervous in his button-down shirt and khakis, but his testimony was clear. I was in my room playing video games with my headphones on, Logan said. Around 11 that night, I looked out my window and saw two people carrying something large wrapped in a tarp, a man and a woman. They were loading it into the SUV. Could you tell what they were carrying? Carol asked gently. No, ma'am. But it looked heavy. They were both struggling with it. Hawkins tried to discredit him. You were focused on your video game, correct? Yes, sir. But I remember because they looked suspicious, like they were trying not to be seen. The second day of trial brought more emotional testimony. Joyce Wallace took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Ivy came to me 2 weeks before she died, Joyce said. She told me Dylan was demanding she increase her life insurance to $750,000. She refused. She was afraid of him. Did you see any signs of physical abuse? Carol asked. Yes. I saw bruises on her arm. When I asked, she said she'd fallen. But I knew better. I should have done more to help her. Courtney Mills testified next, showing text messages Ivy had sent her. I need to get Quinn and me out safely, one read. Another said, I'm planning to file for divorce, but I'm scared of what Dylan will do. Finally, Dr. Joyce Hamilton took the stand. She'd been Ivy's mentor when she'd first started nursing. I trained that girl. Dr. Hamilton said, her voice thick with emotion. I loved her like a daughter, and over the last 6 months I watched her become withdrawn, quiet, not herself. Did you ever speak to her about it? Carol asked. Once. I asked her if everything was all right at home. She looked at me and said, Dr. Hamilton, please pray for me. I watched the jury throughout all of it. Watched their faces change as each witness testified. Some seemed increasingly skeptical of Dylan's innocent appearance. Others still looked sympathetic, wanting to believe Hawkins's story about manipulation and victimhood. But patterns were emerging. Doubt was creeping in. I needed them to see what I saw: a man who'd looked at his wife and seen only a check waiting to be cashed. When court adjourned on the second day, Carol approached the bench. "Your Honor, tomorrow morning we call Quinn Monroe to the stand." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Dylan's lawyer immediately objected, arguing that the child was too young, too traumatized. Judge Morrison overruled him. "The witness will testify," she said firmly. That night I held Quinn as she cried. "I don't want to see him, Grandpa." She sobbed into my shoulder. I know, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "But your mother taught you to be brave. Tomorrow we need that bravery one more time. For her. Before I tell you what Quinn said on that witness stand, I need to feel you here with me. A 10-year-old little girl is about to face her own father in open court and speak the truth about what he did. That kind of courage is rare. That kind of courage changes everything. If you believe her strength deserves to be honored, type 10 in the comments below. Let me see that you're standing with her. And just a gentle reminder, this story contains certain fictionalized elements for reflection and educational purposes. If at any point it feels too heavy, you're free to step away. But if you're ready to witness the moment a child chose bravery over fear, stay with me. Trial day 3. By the time we arrived at the courthouse, word had already spread. The hallway outside courtroom 2B was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Reporters lingered near the entrance. Strangers whispered in tight clusters. The rumor was everywhere a 10-year-old girl was going to testify against her own father. I held Quinn's hand as we walked down the corridor. Dr. Samantha Reed walked on her other side, calm and steady as always. My granddaughter wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, just something she felt comfortable in. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. She looked smaller than ever in that wide courthouse hallway, dwarfed by marble columns and polished floors. The stuffed bunny was tucked inside my jacket pocket just in case she needed it. Over the past year, I had learned something important. Small doesn't mean fragile, and fragile doesn't mean powerless. Still, as I looked at her thin fingers curled around mine, I felt both pride and terror tightening in my chest. In the witness preparation room, Quinn sat in a straight-backed chair, hands folded in her lap, the way she'd practiced. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. "Doctor," Reed knelt in front of her, speaking softly. "Remember what we talked about," Dr. Reed said. "Just tell the truth. You don't have to be perfect. If you feel scared, look at your grandfather. He'll be right there." Quinn nodded. Judge Morrison had offered a privacy screen, a panel that would block Dylan's direct line of sight while Quinn testified. Many courts provide them for child witnesses in violent cases. It's meant to reduce trauma. Quinn refused it. "No screen," she'd said earlier that week, her voice small but unwavering. "I want to look at him." The words had stunned me. I didn't argue. I didn't try to persuade her otherwise. But inside, I was torn in half. I wanted to protect her from every glance Dylan might throw her way, and yet I also understood this was her truth, her voice. When the clerk called her name, the hallway fell quiet. Quinn stood up. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She walked into that courtroom with her chin slightly lifted, even though I could see her hands trembling at her sides. I followed a few steps behind and took my seat in the front row. Dylan sat at the defense table in a gray suit, expression carefully composed. Too composed. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. The clerk helped Quinn climb into the witness chair. She was so small, they had to slide a wooden footstool under her shoes so she could reach the microphone. "Raise your right hand," the clerk said gently. Quinn lifted it. "Do you promise to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Her voice barely carried across the room. "I promise." You could have heard a pin drop. Prosecutor Carol Bennett approached slowly. She didn't crowd the stand. She kept her tone warm, almost maternal. "Hi, Quinn," she began. Can you tell the jury where you were on Saturday, November 18th? In my room, Quinn said. Then I heard yelling downstairs. What did you hear? My dad, she answered without hesitation. And a woman. They were yelling at my mom about money. Carol nodded slightly. What did your mother say? She kept saying no. She said she wouldn't help them anymore. My hands tightened in my lap. What happened next? Carol asked. Quinn swallowed. Mom told me before, if I ever heard loud arguing, I should hide in my closet and not come out until she called me. Her voice grew smaller. So I did. I saw several jurors lean forward unconsciously. What did you hear from the closet? Carol asked gently. Things breaking, Quinn whispered. Like glass. And Mom crying. She was begging them to stop. A woman in the jury box pressed a tissue to her eyes, and then Carol asked carefully. Quinn's fingers gripped the edge of the witness box so tightly her knuckles turned white. My dad said, I'm sorry. She paused, her throat working, and then everything went quiet. I looked at Dylan. When Quinn repeated his words, I'm sorry, his composure cracked for half a second. His lips tightened, his shoulders stiffened. For the first time, he didn't look confident. Carol let the silence stretch. Quinn, she said softly, how long did you stay in that closet? The question hung in the air like a weight. 7 days, Quinn answered. The courtroom seemed to exhale in unison. I waited for Mom to call me out like she promised. She continued, tears spilling freely now. But she never did. I didn't bother wiping my own tears away. I let them fall. Who found you? Carol asked. Quinn turned her head. She looked directly at me. My grandpa, she said. He never gave up. My chest broke open right there in that courtroom. Throughout her testimony, Dylan kept trying to look at her. It wasn't overt, just small glances, subtle attempts to catch her eye. A silent pressure, Judge Morrison noticed. Mr. Keller, she said sharply, face forward. Do not look at the witness. Dylan's attorney, Gerald Hawkins, placed a hand on his arm and whispered something. Dylan reluctantly shifted his gaze. When Carol finished, Hawkins stood for cross-examination. He approached carefully, like someone stepping onto thin ice. Quinn, he began, voice measured and soft. I know this is very difficult. You were scared that night. It was dark. Is it possible you misunderstood what you heard? Quinn looked at him steadily. I know my dad's voice. Hawkins blinked. And sometimes when we're frightened, he continued gently, we can imagine things. I know when he's lying, Quinn said. The interruption rippled through the room. Why would you say that? Hawkins asked. Because he lied to my grandpa, she replied simply. He said Mom and I went on a trip. But Mom was gone. And I was in the closet. Hawkins hesitated. Could it have been the other woman, Chelsea, who hurt your mother? Not your father. I heard both of them, Quinn answered. They did it together. There was no anger in her voice. No theatrics. Just certainty. Hawkins tried a few more angles, suggesting confusion, stress, childhood misunderstanding. Each time Quinn answered calmly. Clearly. She did not waver. Finally, Hawkins lowered his notes. No further questions. Dr. Reed stepped forward to guide Quinn down from the stand. The courtroom remained suspended in silence. As Quinn passed the defense table, she slowed. For a heartbeat, the entire room stopped breathing. She turned, looked directly at Dylan. Her father. Mom forgave him, she said. Her voice carried across every row of benches. But I don't. You could feel the impact of those words physically. Like a shift in gravity. Dylan flinched. Quinn didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out her hand, slipping into Dr. Reed's. The silence that followed was not ordinary courtroom silence. It was absolute. I looked at the jury. Every single one of them was staring at Dylan differently now. Not as a grieving husband. Not as a misunderstood man tangled in someone else's crime. But as a father whose daughter had looked him in the eye and told the truth. The illusion he'd built of calm, of innocence, of financial stress gone wrong, had shattered completely. No adult testimony could match what that child had just done. No forensic chart, no bank record, no timeline. Her clarity had cut through everything. I felt pride swelling alongside grief so sharp it stole my breath. But I also knew this wasn't over. Gerald Hawkins was too seasoned, too strategic to surrender. He would try to rebuild doubt from the wreckage. He would argue trauma, suggest manipulation, raise technicalities. The battle wasn't finished, but something fundamental had changed. Dylan no longer looked like a man unfairly accused. He looked like exactly what he was, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. If Quinn's testimony had broken hearts, Chelsea Parker's would shatter Dylan's defense. Trial day 4. Chelsea walked into the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit and handcuffs. She'd already been convicted in a separate plea hearing. But her story would be the final nail in Dylan's coffin. The bailiff helped her onto the witness stand and removed one handcuff, securing it to the rail. Chelsea looked different from her arrest photo. Thinner, haunted. Her dark-dyed hair had grown out, showing blonde roots. She was sworn in. The jury already knew she'd pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received 25 years. Some of them looked at her with open disgust. Chelsea's hands trembled as she sat down. She knew everyone in that room hated her. Carol Bennett approached, slowly establishing the timeline first. Miss Parker, how did you reconnect with Dylan Keller? We met at a casino about 10 weeks before Ivy died. Chelsea said, her voice barely audible. Dylan was charming. He said his marriage was over, that he still had feelings for me. When did the planning begin? About 8 weeks before. Dylan said, I need your help with something. Can you keep a secret? What was the plan? Chelsea swallowed hard. Dylan said Ivy was keeping his money, that she'd updated her life insurance policy and he deserved half of it. He asked if I would help him, convince her to cooperate. Did you know it was a plan to end Ivy's life? Chelsea tried to maintain her innocence. At first he said we'd just scare her. I didn't know. I didn't realize it would go that far. Carol's voice turned sharp. But you helped plan the storage unit rental. You purchased cleaning supplies. That sounds very premeditated, Miss Parker. Chelsea's composure cracked. Okay, yes. Dylan laid it all out. He said we'd make it look like she ran away. We'd split the insurance money and start over in Mexico. The jury's faces hardened. Tell us what happened on Saturday night, November 18th. Chelsea took a shaky breath. We arrived at the house around 9:45. Dylan was very angry. He'd just found out Ivy had discovered all his debts. When we went inside, Dylan demanded she sign financial power of attorney papers giving him control of everything. What did Ivy say? She refused. Said she was done enabling him. That she was filing for divorce. Or what happened then? Dylan lost it. Chelsea's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He grabbed her. She tried to fight back. I helped hold her while she struggled. Dylan said, if you won't help me willingly, I'll do it another way. And we took her last breath. The courtroom fell into horrified silence. Carol let that sink in before asking the question that mattered most. What happened after Ivy died? We wrapped her in a tarp, Chelsea said, tears streaming down her face. Started carrying her out to my SUV. That's when I heard a noise from upstairs. I asked Dylan, what about Quinn? Is she home? The jury leaned forward. And what did Dylan say? Chelsea's voice broke. He said, and I'll never forget this, she's probably at a sleepover. Even if she's here by the time anyone finds anything, we'll be in Mexico with the money. Several jurors gasped. One woman covered her mouth in horror. Dylan had known. Had heard something upstairs. And he'd deliberately chosen to leave his daughter to die rather than check on her. What did you do to cover up the crime? Carol continued. Dylan used Ivy's phone to send fake text messages. Made it look like she'd left voluntarily. He assured me the police would never suspect us. Throughout Chelsea's testimony, Dylan sat at the defense table shaking his head, muttering lies under his breath. His lawyer kept objecting. Hearsay, self-serving testimony. But Judge Morrison overruled most of them. When Carol finished, Gerald Hawkins stood for cross-examination. His approach was brutal. "You're lying to save yourself, aren't you?" he demanded. "You made a deal with prosecutors. 25 years instead of life. You'd say anything to get that reduced sentence." Chelsea was crying now. "Yes, I made a deal. Because I'm guilty. But Dylan's guilty too. He planned everything. Isn't it true that you manipulated Dylan? That you needed money for your gambling debts?" "I had debts," Chelsea admitted. "But Dylan had more. And Dylan had the life insurance policy. This was his plan." Hawkins pressed harder. "How convenient to blame the man who can't run away because he's the defendant in this case." Chelsea's composure finally shattered completely. "I'm guilty," she shouted. "I know that I'll spend 25 years in prison thinking about what I did." But Dylan was the one who looked at his wife and saw an obstacle. "He's the monster. I was just stupid enough to believe he loved me." The outburst stunned the courtroom. Even Hawkins seemed taken aback. Judge Morrison called for order. Chelsea was crying so hard she could barely breathe. A bailiff brought her tissues. I watched it all from the gallery, feeling absolutely nothing for Chelsea Parker. Her apologies wouldn't bring Ivy back. Her tears wouldn't erase what she'd done. But watching Dylan's defense collapse piece by piece that mattered. When Chelsea was finally excused, she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She didn't look at anyone. Carol Bennett stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the state rests its case. The foundation was solid. Forensic evidence, witness testimony, Quinn's heartbreaking account, and now Chelsea's detailed confession that corroborated everything." It was the defense's turn. Gerald Hawkins rose slowly, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He looked at the jury, then at Judge Morrison. "Madam, Your Honor, the defense calls Dylan Keller to the stand." My blood ran cold. Dylan was going to testify. He was going to try to lie his way out of this, the same way he'd lied his way into my daughter's life. But this time, I would be watching. And so would 12 jurors who had already heard the truth. Dylan Keller took the witness stand like a man who'd rehearsed his role 100 times. Confident, wronged, the victim. But lies always have a way of unraveling under pressure. And I was sitting in the front row, ready to watch every thread get pulled. He was sworn in, wearing an expensive charcoal suit, clean-shaven, his hair perfectly combed. He looked at the jury, making eye contact with each of them, trying to establish some kind of connection. Gerald Hawkins approached with his prepared questions. "So did Dylan tell the jury about your marriage with Ivy?" Dylan's voice was measured, coached. "We had our problems. Money was tight. I made mistakes getting into debt. But I loved Ivy. I loved her deeply. Did you ever hurt your wife?" "Never. Not once in 11 years of marriage." "Do you know how Ivy died?" Dylan's face arranged itself into an expression of grief. I thought maybe she'd left, or that someone else had hurt her. Maybe Chelsea acting alone. Why would Chelsea hurt Ivy? Chelsea was obsessed with me. She wouldn't let go of our past relationship. Maybe she eliminated Ivy out of jealousy. I watched from my seat, my hands clenched on the armrests. Every word was a lie, and he spoke them so smoothly. Then Carol Bennett stood for cross-examination. She walked toward Dylan slowly, calmly, like a predator circling prey. "Mr. Keller, your wife's body was found in a storage unit that you rented, correct? Someone must have framed me, used my identity. Your fingerprints were on the rental contract." Dylan stumbled. I must have signed something Chelsea gave me. I didn't know what it was. Your DNA was found under Ivy's fingernails. How did it get there?" We had an argument earlier that week. She may have scratched me then." The medical examiner testified that those skin cells were fresh, from the very night she died." "I can explain," Carol cut him off. You searched online for, how long does life insurance pay out 3 weeks before your wife died? Explain that. That was research. I'm a financial advisor. Clients ask these questions. Name one client you advised about life insurance that month. Dylan went silent. I don't remember specific names. Carol's voice remained level, but the pressure was building. You recruited 12 people into a Ponzi scheme and earned $95,000 in commission, correct? That's not relevant to this case. It's relevant to your character, Mr. Keller. You made $95,000 by lying to vulnerable people. Then you gambled it all away. So I was a victim of that scheme too. No, Mr. Keller. You were a recruiter. The FBI has proof. You're a professional con artist. Dylan's careful composure was starting to crack. This is ridiculous. Chelsea Parker testified that you knew Quinn might be in the house. That you said, by the time anyone finds anything, we'll be in Mexico with the money. Is that true? Chelsea is lying to save herself. Carol's voice turned sharp. Your daughter testified that she heard you say, I'm sorry, right before her mother stopped breathing. Is Quinn lying too? She was confused. She's just a child. Mr. Keller, you saw your wife as a final score to fix your debts, didn't you? $500,000 to solve all your problems. That's when Dylan exploded. She should have helped me. We were married. That money was mine too. She owed me everything He stopped mid-sentence, realizing his mistake. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Order, but the damage was done. Dylan had just admitted exactly what Carol had accused him of. He'd seen Ivy as money, not a person. In the chaos, Dylan started crying fake tears I could see through from across the room. So I loved her, he sobbed. Elias never believed that he poisoned Ivy against me from the beginning. I couldn't stay silent. I jumped to my feet. You're a liar, Judge Morrison turned to me. Mr. Monroe, sit down immediately, or I will hold you in contempt of court. Detective Carter grabbed my arm and pulled me back into my seat. But in that moment, Dylan and I locked eyes across the courtroom. For 1 second, just one, Dylan's mask fell completely. His face went cold. Empty. Those were the eyes of someone who felt nothing. Dead eyes. Then the fake tears returned. The wounded husband act resumed. But the jury had seen it. That flash of what Dylan Keller really was underneath all the lies. Gerald Hawkins tried to salvage things with redirect examination, asking softball questions to give Dylan a chance to explain. But it was too late. Every answer Dylan gave now sounded hollow, desperate. When Dylan was finally excused and led back to the defense table, he was shaking. Judge Morrison addressed both sides. Closing arguments will begin tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Court is adjourned. As the bailiff called for everyone to rise, I watched Dylan lean over and whisper frantically to Gerald Hawkins. The panic was clear in his eyes. He knew what I knew. His lies had finally caught up with him. Hawkins shook his head at whatever Dylan was asking. No. Whatever desperate play Dylan wanted to make, it wasn't going to happen. Tomorrow the jury would begin deliberations, and I'd spent 12 months making sure they would see the truth. Day 8 of trial. Closing arguments. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than it had all week, as if every word spoken over the last year had settled into the walls and refused to leave. 8 days of testimony, months of preparation, a year of grief sharpened into purpose. This was the moment everything led to. Prosecutor Carol Bennett rose first. She didn't shuffle papers. She didn't pace. She stood in the center of the courtroom, hands resting lightly on the edge of the prosecution table, and let the silence gather around her. Dylan Keller planned this murder for 2 months. She began, her voice steady but resonant. He studied the insurance policies. He calculated the debt. He recruited Chelsea Parker. He secured a storage unit. He bought cleaning supplies. She took a step toward the jury. This was not a crime of passion. This was not an accident. This was a financial strategy. Her words cut clean and precise. He stood in that living room and took away Ivy Monroe's final breath. Then he left his 10-year-old daughter upstairs alone, without food, without water, without help, for 7 days. You could hear someone stifle a sob in the gallery. For $500,000, Carol continued. That is the price he assigned to his wife's life. She paused, letting that number hang in the air like a weight. Do not let him walk away from that decision. Do not let calculated greed hide behind excuses. Hold him accountable. She sat down. Defense attorney Gerald Hawkins stood slowly smoothing the front of his suit jacket, as though resetting the tone of the room. Dylan Keller is guilty of debt, he began evenly. Guilty of poor judgment. Guilty of trusting the wrong person. He gestured subtly toward Dylan, but premeditated murder. The state wants you to believe that everything lines up perfectly. It does not. He paced once before the jury. Chelsea Parker is the one who struck the fatal blow. She is the one cutting a deal. She is the one who benefits most from shifting blame. And a 10-year-old child traumatized, terrified, is not a forensic instrument. He lowered his voice. There is reasonable doubt. And if there is reasonable doubt, your duty is clear. He returned to his seat. I watched the jurors carefully. Some faces were set firm, resolute, others unreadable. A few looked torn. Judge Patricia Morrison adjusted her glasses and lifted her gavel. Before the jury begins deliberation, she said, I am allowing Mr. Elias Monroe to address the court. My name echoed through the room. My legs felt unsteady as I stood. The walk to the front of the courtroom seemed longer than it should have been. I gripped the podium. My name is Elias Monroe, I began. My voice trembled, but I did not stop. Ivy Monroe was my only daughter. I looked toward the jury. For 34 years, she was the center of my world. She was kind. She was stubborn. She was a nurse who stayed late to comfort strangers. I turned my head slightly and met Dylan's eyes. Dylan Keller didn't just take her life. He destroyed my granddaughter's childhood. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. He left a 10-year-old child alone in a closet for 7 days. She waited for her mother to call her out. She believed she'd done something wrong. The courtroom was utterly silent. I will never walk my daughter down the aisle again. I will never hear her laugh at my terrible jokes. I will never see her grow old. My hands trembled on the edge of the podium. Dylan took everything. I faced him fully. You won't escape this. Not while I'm breathing. My voice steadied. And Ivy, she was not just a victim. She was a mother who loved her child so much, she prepared her to survive even if she couldn't. I swallowed. That is her legacy. Not how she died, but the love she left behind. When I stepped back, I didn't wipe the tears from my face. Several jurors were crying openly. The judge dismissed the jury at 2 o'clock. Deliberations will begin immediately. And then came the waiting. Joyce Wallace stood with me in the courthouse hallway. Quinn had stayed home with Emma, Dr. Reed's assistant, shielded from this final stretch. 3 o'clock, 4, 5. Each minute stretched thin and brittle. What if they don't believe us? I murmured once. Detective Noah Carter stood nearby, arms folded. They believe, he said quietly. I saw their faces when Dylan testified. They saw him. 6 o'clock, 7. The courthouse gradually emptied. Staff moved quietly through the halls. Reporters lingered near the courtroom doors. At 8 p.m., a bailiff stepped into the hallway. They've reached a verdict. Everything inside me went still. We returned to the courtroom. Dylan sat rigid at the defense table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were pale. Judge Morrison looked at the foreperson. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and steady eyes, stood. We have your honor. I felt my pulse in my throat. In the case of the state of Tennessee versus Dylan Keller on the charge of premeditated murder resulting in death, how do you find? Her voice did not waver. We find the defendant guilty. The word reverberated. A sound escaped my chest that I didn't recognize as my own. The judge continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. on the charge of child endangerment. Guilty. Each count, each affirmation. Guilty. Dylan's face shifted from disbelief to fury. His jaw worked as though he were biting back words. His attorney rose quickly. "We will be filing an immediate appeal." Judge Morrison's voice was firm, noted. 2 weeks later, we returned for sentencing. The courtroom was quieter this time. No anticipation, only finality. Judge Morrison read from prepared remarks. "Dylan Keller, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the premeditated murder of Ivy Monroe for financial gain." Her eyes fixed on him. "You have demonstrated no remorse. You left your daughter in a position where she could have died. You manipulated those around you for your own benefit." She paused. "I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Dylan erupted. "This is wrong, I didn't." 2 officers were already at his side. They restrained him as he shouted, voice cracking with rage and desperation. The sound echoed as he was dragged from the courtroom. Chelsea Parker received 25 years eligible for parole after 20. When Dylan was led past me in chains, he turned his head. For a moment our eyes met. I did not look away. I wanted him to see that this was the consequence of his choices, that he had not broken us. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward. "Mr. Monroe, how do you feel?" Microphones hovered inches from my face. I said nothing. There were no words that would matter more than the verdict already spoken. I walked past them. Joyce stood near the steps, holding Quinn's hand. When my granddaughter saw me, she ran. She collided with my chest and wrapped her arms around me. "Is it over, Grandpa?" she whispered. I held her tightly. "Yes," I said softly. "It's over. He can never hurt anyone again." She pressed her face into my shoulder. "Can we go home?" Home. Not the house in Tennessee. Not the silent one on Oakwood Drive. But somewhere new. Somewhere we would build together. I rested my chin against the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "Let's go home." 6 months after Dylan Keller was sentenced to life in prison, people still ask me, "How do you move forward after something like that?" The answer is never simple. You don't move on from losing a child. You learn to carry it differently. You find new reasons to wake up each morning. For me, that reason has a name, Quinn. We built a new life together in Tennessee. I renovated my house for her, painted her bedroom soft blue, installed shelves for her books and drawings. She started 5th grade at the local elementary school. Her best friend is Emma Joyce Wallace's daughter. Every Saturday, they take art classes together. Therapy with Dr. Samantha Reed continues now monthly instead of weekly. The nightmares come maybe once a month instead of every night. She laughs more. God, I treasure that sound. She still keeps her stuffed bunny but doesn't clutch it constantly. She talks about Ivy openly. "Grandpa, remember when Mom taught me to make pancakes?" She's learning she can be happy without feeling guilty. My own healing is messier. The pain is still there, but the edges have softened. I found purpose in raising Quinn, in honoring Ivy's memory. Sunday dinners at Joyce's house became our tradition. I started teaching electrical work part-time again. And one Saturday morning in the garage, I found myself teaching Quinn the same way I'd taught her mother decades before. Quinn sat on a wooden stool, small hands covered in grease face, scrunched in concentration, as she studied the lamp we were fixing. She looked exactly like Ivy at that age. "This blue wire connects to the neutral," I explained. "See, because everything needs a path to return to right," she said. I smiled through the ache. "Exactly, sweetheart. You sound just like your mom. Is that okay? That's the best thing you could possibly be." We worked in silence before she asked, "Grandpa, why does Miss Joyce help us so much they didn't have to?" I set down my tools. "Because your mother loved people so well, sweetheart. She took care of Joyce when Joyce's husband was sick. She was always there for everyone. And when you love people well, they love you back." Quinn frowned. "But Mom's gone. How can they still love her?" Love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just grows. Like an electrical current, it keeps flowing through everyone who's connected. Her face brightened. So we're all connected, like wires. Exactly like wires. Later that week, I visited Ivy's grave alone. The small cemetery was quiet, peaceful. I sat beside the headstone tracing her name. "I got justice for you, baby girl," I whispered. "Dylan will spend the rest of his life in a cell. I hope it haunts him every day." My voice cracked. "Quinn's doing okay. She's strong like you. I'm teaching her electrical work. She's good at it. Smart just like her mother. I miss you every day, but I'm taking care of her. I promise." People ask how I keep going. The answer is simple. I have to. For Quinn. For Ivy's memory. Dylan took my daughter, but he couldn't take our love. He couldn't take our family. He couldn't take our hope. The pain doesn't disappear. You just learn to carry it differently. Quinn asks about her mother often. We talk about Ivy, the skilled nurse, the loving mother, the woman who taught her child how to survive, even when she couldn't survive herself. That's Ivy's legacy. Not how she died, but how she lived, how she loved, how she prepared her daughter for a world without her. Every Friday at 6 o'clock, I still expect the phone to ring. Of course it doesn't. But sometimes when Quinn's laughing in the next room or showing me something she built, I feel Ivy here. In the sunlight through the window, in the warmth of family at Joyce's table, in the connections that death cannot sever. Back in the garage, Quinn finished wiring the lamp. She plugged it in and flipped the switch. Light flooded the workspace. "I did it. It works," she shouted. "You certainly did, sweetheart. Your mom would be so proud." She threw her arms around me. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Quinn. Always. And to you who stayed until the very end of this family story, I want to leave you with something deeper than a verdict. I spent a full year chasing justice for my daughter. One long, relentless year of courtrooms, evidence, sleepless nights, and memories that refused to fade. In the end, justice came. Dylan Keller will spend the rest of his life behind prison walls. The system worked. The truth prevailed. But if I could step back into the past, into that uneasy moment at the wedding, into those strained phone calls where Ivy's voice felt just a little too tight, I would tell myself one thing: trust your instincts sooner. The signs were there. The way Dylan's eyes shifted whenever money came up. The rehearsed calm in his tone. The subtle fear in my daughter's pauses. I saw it all, but I softened it. I told myself I was being overprotective. I told myself love would fix it. I told myself I was imagining danger where there wasn't any. Don't do that. If something feels wrong, don't silence that voice inside you. Ask the uncomfortable question. Lean into the doubt. Protection is not paranoia. Sometimes it is the only early warning you get. This family story taught me something. I wish I had learned sooner. Evil rarely looks like evil. It doesn't walk into your home announcing itself. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table. Sometimes it calls you dad. Sometimes it builds trust before it breaks everything. What some might call revenge was never about hatred. It was about accountability. It was about protecting my granddaughter and making sure the man who destroyed our lives could never hurt another soul. But here's the truth. No one tells you in Grandpa's stories justice does not rewind time. It does not return laughter to an empty kitchen. It does not bring back a daughter's voice on Friday evenings. What it does is stop the darkness from spreading further. And in that there is purpose. When I look back on this family story, I see something even stronger than tragedy. I see Ivy's love. She prepared Quinn not just to survive 7 days hidden in a closet, but to survive a lifetime without her. She sensed the danger closing in, and in the only way she could, she built a bridge for her child to cross into safety. That is the power of a mother's love. It outlives fear. It outlives violence. It even outlives death. In chasing justice, I learned something else. Justice is not just punishment. It is preservation. It is saying the life that was taken mattered. It is refusing to let the story end with cruelty. That is the heart of Grandpa's stories like this one, not vengeance, but protection. Not rage, but responsibility. And along the way, God placed people in our path. Joyce Wallace, who never left our side. Detective Noah Carter, who refused to cut corners. Dr. Samantha Reed, who helped Quinn find her voice again. I still don't understand why Ivy's life had to end the way it did. I may never understand that part of this family story. But I do know this: we were not abandoned in the aftermath. Strength arrived in unexpected forms. Grace showed up in human hands. If you take anything from these grandpa stories, let it be this: listen to your gut. If a relationship feels unsafe, don't dismiss it. If you sense control, secrecy, manipulation, shine light on it. Ask questions, seek help, speak up. A father or a grandfather should never have to fight for justice after the fact. We should be brave enough to act before tragedy strikes. If this family story moved, you share it with someone who might need the reminder. Leave a comment telling me what stayed with you. And if you value grandpa stories that confront darkness but choose hope, consider subscribing. Your support helps these stories reach others who may be standing at a crossroads, unsure whether to trust their instincts. One final note. As with many grandpa stories shared here, certain elements may be shaped for reflection and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals or places is coincidental. If this content feels too heavy for you, please step away and care for your heart. Take care of yourselves and take care of the people you love. Because love, real love, is the current that keeps flowing long after everything else goes dark.